Hello, this is Dr. Jean. Dear future people, in the last video we were talking about very ugly things. In this video we are going to talk about religion. And we will talk about things that are very beautiful. In fact, the most beautiful thing that can be. Now, I'm sure that in the future today's topic is going to be less relevant. But in 2023, it would be very highly important. And in fact, it could change somebody's life if they were willing to listen to it. Well, let's talk about religion by defining religion. Religion is a community practice, a practical implementation of philosophy evolved to optimize living together. From this, you immediately see that Vitologia has a very radically different approach. Religion here is a community practice. So that immediately shows you that religion is always relative to a community. And it's going to evolve specifically in a community for a community. It is a philosophy, it is a culture that is implemented in everyday life. There is a community practice. There is a change in lifestyle. There is a change in life based on a common point of view, a common philosophy. So the projection of religion at the individual level is going to be goodness, an attitude to promote social cohesion and cooperation. So goodness in an individual means that that individual is regarded as an organic part of the community with maximum consideration toward the members of the community and the community itself. So a good-hearted person is the ultimate goal of religious practice at the individual level. Whereas at the community level, the aim, the highest aim of religion is a functional community with a high degree of social cooperation. So the abstraction, the ultimate theoretical objective is going to mean that we have goodness. We have goodness at the level of the individual, and we have a functional, well-organized community with a community spirit at the level of the community. But we are going to see something else also, that this goodness, although relative to the community, ideally is going to be without a definite object. It's going to be faith, trust, and love without a specific focus. It's going to be faith in all and love of all. A love of life and a love of reality. And the belief in life and the belief in reality. Why is this so important? Because we are going to contrast these aims with idolatry. And so remember when we talked about the level of mental organization and how the level of mental organization is going to change the relationship between mind and reality, then it's going to also be the same for religion. So you have a different kind of religion for a low mental level of organization and for high level of mental organization. And the lowest possible level of religion which is very relevant to someone with a low-level mental organization, is going to be idolatry. So with idolatry, we have a definite object or center for faith. Faith is limited as it is directed toward a specific focal point. And that's a very important thing. In other words, your idol is going to be a center. It's going to be a center that is different from everything else. So it has very little to do with reality, which is encompassing everything. It has a definite location, and it has a distant location also. So again, your faith, your love, your attention is going to have a very specific, distinct focal point, which is then placed at a distance. So this centrality may be focusing on a common ancestor, a tyrant, an institution, a hierarchy, a set of unalterable laws or customs, traditions or truths. But be it as it may, all these things represent a distinct, fixed, set centrality. And from the point of view of Vitologia, these can be conceptualized as useful aids. When faith is yet an early, primordial, poorly evolved stage. In other words, everyone has to start somewhere. And the easiest thing to do is to pick something, like a common ancestor, for example, like an imagined divine unit, for example, or some kind of sacred traditions or truths or customs, and around it build up a set of rituals, a set of regulations. This is how religion starts out when your mental organization is yet poorly evolved. But with mental organization highly developed, the usefulness of these aids, these tools, become limited. And so they are going to be most relevant when you have regression. Like in psychology, when you have any kind of trauma or disease or emotional turmoil or instability of any kind, then you regress back to an earlier stage of development. And so you also regress back to this primordial state of religion, which is idolatry. And in these circumstances, idolatry may be very useful. But once you develop a higher mental organization in terms of your community, then religion is gonna continue to grow. It will be more complex, and it will require less and less and less of these methods. And this is what we call a holy direction of religion. Something that you strive for, something that you're trying to do. And that is to become less methodical, to require less support from fixed categories, fixed customs, fixed rituals, unalterable practices, definite objects, fixed centers, fixed standard focus of attention, and especially truths without domains. So you will transcend these things. You will try to develop beyond these things. And when you do, then religion comes alive. It comes alive when it is alive. It is dynamic, incorporating new patterns, manifestations of life and reality. You see, if we believe that life and reality are infinite, diverse, ever-changing, and continuous, then we see that reality and life will always change complex patterns. So new patterns arise. And when new patterns arise, then religion will consider these new patterns. Instead of having set, fixed, universal, absolute patterns, it actually is processing the new patterns. And when processing new patterns, it is not overwhelmed by these changes, but maintains the perspective of considering all variables, old and new, together. That means that religion is alive. Now, you achieve transcendence when your religious thoughts and religious practice based on these thoughts rise above these methodical aids and become organized, accepting but also integrating these new patterns based on life experience of that specific community. So from this you immediately see that transcendence is always specific because it considers local life experience without methodical aids that are set and that seem to be fixed and universal. So with that you create a balance because life experience that you accumulated in the community balances out sudden strong effects, creating more stability, order and harmony. You see, what you have here is an open community that considers all kinds of sources of information. But instead of being overwhelmed by new information, it is able to process new information. And with that new information, the old information will change to some extent. But nevertheless, it stays. It remains relevant. And so you do not lose stability, order, and harmony, but you maintain it. You grow together with life. So that is what robustness means, that you have the ability to maintain stability in face of new information. It is a function of processing, integrating, and organizing. And now let's look at this picture. Somebody is organizing the things in the house according to a unique pattern of how that organization of things works best. Now, as the children grow up, or relationship changes, or the lifestyle changes naturally in life with age, with new circumstances and conditions, there are going to be new objects. There's going to be change in the house itself, and according to that, this reorganization may need to be different at one time point compared to a previous time point. Who knows best how to reorganize things based on new conditions? It is the people who live in the house who know best how to reorganize things based on the current situation, right? And this reorganization makes somebody robust. Because if something changes, we have an order to fall back on, and that order is going to change, but not dramatically. It's going to be smoothed out. So maintenance of harmony and order, which is required for social cohesion, which in turn is necessary for cooperation, needs a high degree of mental activity. It is like reorganizing the house. It is a lot of work. But it is not a given. You cannot reorganize the house always in the same way, in a standard way, because conditions change. And your reorganization reflects those conditions, but it also reflects you. how you, under a specific set of circumstances, will work best in a given pattern of organization. But for that, you need to work. You need to use your imagination of how to reorganize the house so that it functions best under the given circumstances. Now, for a community, one aspect of such activity is local culture. Culture means a common approach of how we do things based on local circumstances, but also our heritage. Previous life experience of previous community members of the community, right? We reorganize the house based on our previous experiences and also based on new circumstances. Any community or social group or society reaching a high degree of functional social cohesion, highly organized, is called a life system. So the life system is like an organism. It's an organic functional whole based on religious practice, tradition, and culture. Now, it is extremely important, and especially important in 2023, that we make a very clear distinction here. When we are talking about religion, we are talking about common practices of how we organize our lives in a community so that the community works better. What we are not talking about is religious tradition. Religious tradition may be different based on local conditions, but religious institutions, religious laws, religious thoughts, religious tradition, kind of religion that has a name, the kind of religion that is set around certain laws or persons or a divine unit, is not what we are talking about here. Because we consider these things as aids, as support systems, as methods, as categories, as tools. They are like a cleaning lady that we hire to help things organize in our house. Now, of course, a cleaning lady may be very useful in a given set of circumstances. And we might be incapacitated because we are sick, or we are otherwise engaged, or just doing other things, so that we delegate things out to a cleaning lady. But it is very important that we maintain control over our mental organization. There are certain core things that we cannot delegate out. Otherwise, we simply don't know where things are, because our things are organized, from the perspective of the cleaning lady, of how the cleaning lady would do things, how the cleaning lady would imagine how things are best organized. But if we delegate core things of our mental organization, then we lose this control. And by losing control, we lose specificity based on our perspectives. So this is very, very important to understand, that we cannot be guided by tools, by methodology, which is standard, but we need to be guided by our own life experience. And once again, I'm talking about not persons necessarily, but about communities. Communities that have a certain specific kind of approach to things and religious practices, common life patterns based on those. So to make this easy, we contrast a life system and idolatry. So when we are talking about a life system, we are talking about organic unity. We are talking about a community functioning as an organic unit. So we are going to be transcendent, dynamic, harmonious, creating robustness, and that means that we are going to accept and integrate new patterns and manifestations of reality, of life. And that requires imagination and effort. So our religion is going to be alive. Because like life itself and like reality, it's going to always have new patterns. And those new patterns require imagination and effort so that you reorganize the house based on new circumstances. On the other hand, idolatry is always fixed. It presents itself as a given, as a gift. It is very passive. It is highly limited because it is focused. And it maintains stability by limiting incoming information, a mechanism that we call reduction. Remember when we were talking about the direction of the mind, and we said that the reality is not homogeneous. So if we look this way versus if we look that way, we are going to see something basically and fundamentally different. So to arrive at a fixed, given, passive type of world, we need to reduce our perspective so that we always see the same thing. We minimize change. We ignore diversity. And so we do not want to see dynamic patterns. We need to see the whole fixed things over and over and over again. So it does not require a high degree of maintenance. Why? Because you don't need to constantly reorganize your house. So it's very comfortable that way. And so here we come to the core of the matter, that a life system requires a lot of imagination and effort. And because of the tendency in the masses toward mental inertia, it's going to be much less popular. But it's going to lead to transcendent thought because your standard fixed tools are not going to be enough. You will need to adopt local uniqueness, local life experiences, and adjust your religious practices to new patterns, new conditions. Now, idolatry, on the other hand, is going to be very comfortable since it is a given. It is fixed, requiring a little effort, and you suppress your imagination, and therefore it's going to be highly popular and contagious. It's going to be viral. In fact, it is a mental virus because it standardizes things. Because with idolatry, everything is always the same. It is fixed. It is standard. It is the same for everyone. It is a distant focus that everybody is instructed to look at. Right? So on the left-hand side, we have effort, and we have uniqueness, and we have the need to surpass the given units of thought called categories or tools, common tools, standard tools, because we realize that we need to and we are able to digest the changes and the diversity that is natural for reality. On the right-hand side, we have fanaticism. Why? Because we reduce our attention so that we can maintain the idea of fixations, of standard things, of permanent, universal things, absolute things. So on the left hand side, we are trying to see something that is dynamic, that is alive. It changes constantly. And we have a good person and a high degree of organization inside the community based on practices that were developed in the first place to achieve these goals. On the right hand side, we have a limited attention to a focal point. And no matter where you are, you always look at one focal point, right? You have a standard approach. Everybody looking at the same thing, okay? And it's not important from what direction you are looking, okay? You standardize things into one distant artificial focal point. And then, instead of good person and communities, you have a fanatical zealot. And you have a mental virus that is going to spread, basically sparing you local, unique effort. So with that, we are going to go to our next topic, which is very highly connected to this idea. In other words, what you look at, not only for religion, but in general. When you look afar, then objects seem smaller and less attached, and therefore less relevant for you. Now, they may be wonderful, like you see these beautiful clouds and the setting sun and the sky, and it all seems very, very beautiful, but it also looks distant. And so you are naturally less attached to these things. Whereas if you look near, things seem large and you are highly attached because things look very relevant. And there's no doubt about the importance of things that you are familiar with, that you are attached to. Parents, community, tradition, culture, home, familiar places, familiar things. The feeling of belonging, okay, are always going to be larger for you, more important for you. They carry more weight. They are more relevant, they are more important. And so when you do research, when you engage in science, you will try to suppress this and imagine that whatever you are looking at, you are neutral to it. Whatever you are looking at, you do not feel attached to, right? And so to some degree you can do that, but there is always limitations. So when you have customs, rules, truths, informations attached to these appear more trustworthy because these customs and rules and truths, common information, are more familiar to you. And when you engage in objective thinking, you try to suppress these attachments. But nevertheless, they always lurk, they always are there. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to consider that you are attached to those things. Now the problem always is when you assume that you are able to remove this factor, that you are truly able to think, look at things objectively. And when you believe that you have no deep connection with things, now that is going to be a big problem. Mind activity with direction and weight means that you have enhanced sensitivity towards something. You feel the relevance of something, and that means that you have interest for that thing. Okay? So your mind direction has a certain weight for something with enhanced sensitivity, that means that you're interested in that something. Now, when your mind direction has a weight that is highly focused, so your interest is very highly focused, then that is termed attention. And attention is key in any inquiry and research. Now, attention may be directed toward a wide variety of objects, but it has an inherent weight, sensitivity attached, even emotional tone attached to it. And you try to suppress this, but nevertheless it's always there. The attention object may be a human person, an inanimate object, a phenomenon, an event, complex abstract systems. But if you are very highly organized and your mind function is very highly sophisticated, then you will see that the object of your attention is not going to be distinct things with very simple relationship between them, but it's going to be complex patterns. You see, it's going to be a matrix. It's going to be a multi-dimensional complex reality. And then your attention, instead of being focused and the focus being very distinct, in other words, limited to this space and not that space, then your attention is going to become an attention field. This is an analogy to electromagnetic field, gravitational field, or whatever field that we see in physics. You see, your attention will have a certain scope. It also has certain densities. It has certain things that you are more interested in, certain things that you are less interested in. But you are trying always to consider the whole picture. Yes, certain things are going to be more important, certain things are going to be less important. And that is the densities of the field. So the attention field is going to see complex patterns which are in flux, rather than singular units or functional units called systems. So an attention field with higher resolution will see a matrix of patterns that is in constant change. A matrix here means that you have a lot of variables in a complex relationship, so that if one variable changes, it changes the relationship of other variables. Okay? And this complex field of variables is going to have densities, so that some things are going to be more important and more interesting for you than others. But those things, nevertheless, are not going to be distinct. They are just densities. So the attention field has densities of effects, events, and phenomena. What has more weight, what is more relevant appears more dense, but not separate, not self-containing, not detached. The field is one big whole. Okay? It does not consist of small separate things. Right? So let's take an example. Here's a child focusing on a definite object. So this object is conceptualized as a discrete unit, distinct in space and in time, which has a definite boundary. If something has a definite boundary and is detached from the observer, then it is said to exist. Okay? Now, this idea of somebody looking at something that is separate makes no sense in Vitologia, because what you have is an attention field. So the observer sees a flux of densities, and certain things are going to be more important than others, but nevertheless you always consider all the things that you are able to see. And what you are able to see is very dependent on the attention span and resolution. Your span and your resolution, which is specific to you, is going to be abstracted as the world. Remember, we defined world before as the totality of things that somebody or a community of people consider or are aware of. And those things may be relationships, may be imaginary things, whatever. But whatever they are aware of, what they are able to consider. But this world is relative to the observer, okay, or individual, community, society, and humanity, based on their span. You see, reality being infinite, any community has a span of things that they are willing or able to consider based on their capacity. And they also have a resolution. What finite changes and diversities are they able to see? And so therefore, the world for them, based on their potential span and resolution, is very specific. Now, the idea of the world is expanded into the universe, which is said to be objective. And that means that worlds are united based on the idea of an imaginary ideal observer, right? And here becomes something very interesting, because the ideal observer is an abstraction that is always relevant to the people who make that abstraction. So you make that abstraction of the ideal observer as based on your own experiences, right? So how the world can be viewed by somebody is based on how you imagine that somebody. Okay? So it's an abstraction. Now, culturally, in the term universe, the physical and material aspects are emphasized, because culturally, nowadays, people look at physical and material aspects as more important. Okay? But they can look at also other things, which makes other things more important. But the universe is always based on the idea of an ideal observer, of an ideal thinker. And that is based on your experience. Somebody with eyes, or somebody who is blind. Somebody with eyes may see things in a certain way, but you have to understand that you imagine this ideal observer as somebody who is able to see. And so the blind people are excluded from this, right? So for the concept of the universe to make sense, the universe is also detached from the observer. Why is that? Because if the universe is in relationship with the observer, then it cannot be objective. So you employ a trick here, and that is that you make the observer insignificant and the object of attention, the universe, very large. And so therefore the observer will seem to have very little influence on the universe. And there you go, an objective thing, because the observer is then falling out of the equation, right? So here's what happens. The universe is enlarged. For example, you have a huge space, or you have a huge time, and you have horrendously large numbers. To make the observer small, so that the attachment of the observer to the object of attention, the universe, is going to be insignificant, right? So the idea, though, is that span and resolution is specific to the observer, and that can be changed. So if the observer wants a higher span and a more delicate resolution, the observer can do that by becoming more organized and active. Because if you have a highly organized and active mind, then your span is going to be larger and your resolution is going to be more refined, right? So your world is going to change because your relationship with the world is going to change. And all of a sudden, you will see entirely differently the same things that you saw before. So seeing the world not as fixed and given, but as a potential, and a potential for expression, that means that you have an imagination. Now let's look at these pictures to understand this. So you have a stone here, and that stone is a given. It looks somehow, it has certain properties. But you then express yourself by transforming this stone. And then all of a sudden, this stone is going to reflect not only its independent properties, but also you, your emotional state, your beliefs, right? Your imagination. And so all of a sudden, we are given something that is standard and fixed, at least we think so. And all of a sudden, it has something very highly specific, very unique. So you have a static and fixed world, which is then enlarged, so that you feel that the observer is insignificant. And the influence of the observer is negligible. On the other hand, you have a dynamic, malleable world of potentialities, which is in organic interaction with the observer. So all of a sudden you are actor and co-creator, because the world is always recreated. These worlds are not equivalent, and the observers are different. So every observer is different. And when you think of an ideal observer, you extend your prior experience. You consider observers that might be based on how you imagine an observer can be, based on your prior experience. So mind cultivation is like a training. It creates an abundance by robust openness promoting imagination. See, here's what happens. If you have a larger capacity to digest information, if you have the capacity to consider a large number of factors, large number of variables, then you do not need to limit your span to maintain inner stability, because you are robust. So robustness allows you to look at different directions. You have an abundance of information. You have a very highly complex matrix, right? And then you see the dynamic nature of reality. So your attention becomes active and organic. Active here means that you are influencing what you observe, and you consider that relationship between you and the observed entity. And you do this with a high span and resolution that you achieved by organizing your mind. The other issue is that your attention field should always focus on everyday life, because everyday life gives you the most relevant information. You will always be most sensitive to everyday life information, because that's what is relevant, that's what is near. Now you might ignore that by insisting on some distant focus, but it is our nature to be local. It is our nature to be unique. And that nature always comes up. And so if you organize your mind, then you allow that nature to manifest. Life experience is when your attention is organic and is focused on actual life as it unfolds. Synchronization, coordination of worlds is very important. Because if you want to be a higher organism, a part of a higher organism, then you need communication, language, tradition, culture, religion, mathematics, you need rituals, you need games, okay? So that you see a higher perspective by uniting your mind activity with other entities or communities. And your attention needs coordination, certainly. But it's very important that when you coordinate things, you maintain your perspectives. You do not emulate, you do not take over, and you do not delegate things out, but you unite perspectives, yours with somebody else's. Okay, it's very important. And if you do that, then you do not need the assumption of idealized observers or standard observers, standard thinkers, because you maintain the specificity of the organic parts of the new organisms, even while communicating. So synchronization, coordination of worlds is important. It is taken to the limit by extension. You see, when you ignore local uniqueness, then you extend your experiences into an imaginary space. And then you believe that attention, interest, sensitivity, and locality is universal for any possible observers. And then you arrive at the idea of an absolute reference frame, right? So in other words, you have an ideal observer or thinker with approximately the same type of attention and interest and sensitivity. Locality is ignored, and so what you emphasize is constant fixed patterns, similarities, right? And if you do that, then with an absolute reference frame, you arrive at the idea of standardized existence. Because if you have an absolute reference frame, then the object of your attention is going to be independent of you. Because all observers are thought to be the same. An ideal observer, a general subject, is introduced. And then you're going to have a problem. So, yes, there's nothing wrong with being united. In fact, that's what we want. We want to be united because unification brings strength. This is true. The problem, though, is homogeneity. If you have a community, a united organic community, then it is an asset if the members of the community are different, so that they can add new aspects, new perspectives, new points of view to the community perspective. So that if you have a problem, okay, of an unexpected kind, then you have something as a reserve, something to fall back on. Because you have this and that and that and that kind of approach with different possible solutions. But if things are standardized in such a way that things are uniform, that perspectives, approaches are uniform, then you have a standard world of objectivity, which is going to get into trouble when conditions and circumstances change, because you do not have the reserve, okay, of different perspectives, because everything is made to be the same. You have standard and idealized observers. And here we have the champion of standardization, and that is statistics. We have the normal distribution here. And in the normal distribution, this is average, the mean, and the mean is thought to be the truth, okay? That is the standard. That is the ideal. And everything else that is far away from the truth is an outlier, is in error, you see? So if you standardize things, things are homogeneous, and everything that is homogeneous should be close to the mean, right? That's what homogeneity means. And every outlier is going to be considered to be in error. And that's the problem. Because if you have synchronization and coordination based on very simple fixations, standardization, then you will not be able to avoid toxic competition. It is because, of course, there are alternative worldviews, because every worldview reflects a locality of life experience. So if you then extend that life experience as if it was universal, as if it was absolute, then you will have alternative views, all claiming to be universal. And then they will collide ferociously. And you are going to have a war of ideas, of religious tradition, of political ideology, etc. It is guaranteed. You cannot avoid that. In Vitologia, war of ideas, war of religions, are a contradiction in term, because you only have competition if you have a reduction, if you ignore differences. Remember the direction of the mind? I understand that if I look this way, I'm going to see something different than if I look that way. And since everything is local, you can never see everything in all directions. That would be divine attention, which we strive towards, but you know, it's infinite. Because of that, we respect locality, we respect uniqueness. And therefore, religion is always relative to that community. It cannot be set. It cannot be fixed. And if it's not set and if it is not fixed, then it does not need protection. You may unify your perspectives. You may unify, you add, your religious thoughts to somebody else's religious thought, and you may come up with a synthesis of those, okay? But you understand that those things are based on your experience, or your unified experience, but not a standard ideal experience of an ideal imagined abstract person, right? So therefore you cannot have competition, and you cannot have conflict arising from competition. Fanaticism and orthodoxy is born to protect those fixed and standardized worlds. You see, those fixed and standardized worlds need protection because their relevance, their domain is local, but they are thought to be universal. So there's a tension between local and universal, right? And you need power, you need force to enforce that universality, which is not there. It's an illusion. Illusions to be maintained, you need force. And the fixation, the standardization of such a universal absolute is an illusion. So your delusion is going to be that there's constancy, uniformity, objectivity, and there is a standard reference frame. The delusion will then lead to worshipping methods and categories. So what is meant to be an aid for you to better understand something, if you are just starting out somewhere, it becomes something sacred, something fixed. So you worship the method instead of understanding the idea and adding the idea uniquely to your life experience. Okay? And so these methods and categories, okay, then lead to the creation of organizations. There is a certain dogma, there's certain teachings, and these teachings and dogmas are extremely useful for beginners. Okay? But the problem is that if you delegate out your own thinking and you emulate, you imitate others by assuming categories, no matter what conditions you are, no matter your local uniqueness, then you are going to create imaginary standards. And those imaginary standards lead to the delusion of objective existence, of universal truths, and the idea of the absolute. And behind all of this, there's the desire for comfort and safety, manifesting as mental inertia and fixed certainty. You certainly are going to have fixed certainty if you ignore how things are complex and how things change, right? And so you believe that comfort comes from inertia, whereas comfort can also come from organization and a wide perspective, right? But you just need an effort, high maintenance and work to do that. So, we have ideas that are generalized concepts in empty artificial space that derive from local experiences, okay? And so because they originally derive from local uniqueness and locality, and they are thought to be universal because of extension, linear extrapolation, okay? Therefore, they have to be put in the distance and they have to be put in virtual space. So, if the ideas are originally local and secondarily generalized, and the ideas are always related to their origin, And when they are generalized, then they create the delusions that the localities did not matter. That's what we call universality. But sooner or later, there is going to be an opposition between the locality of things and the imagined universality of things. And then we arrive at truth values and relevance. So attention is always local and unique, with interest, sensitivity, perspective inherently different, and interactions that always matter in observation. Ideas require domains, a set of circumstances and conditions in which they are relevant. In other words, a local domain. Uniformity assigns zero variability to a variable. That means 100% coordination, which is an artificial linear thing. And this idea of uniformity just makes no sense at all to a highly organized mind, because uniformity is not what you see. Uniformity is always imaginary. So, we again say that transcendence is an attention field that considers complex patterns in constant flux, because you have such an organized mind that you do not need a reduction, but you dare to consider a high number of variables. And the higher the number of your variables that you are able to see and you are willing to consider, the more you see the differences, the diversity of things. Unique reorganization never stops, because complexity is always infinite. So the higher your organization, the more reorganization is needed, requiring a constant maintenance, right? Because you will see that with a lot of variables that you consider reflect very high potentiality. See, the more variety you are willing to consider, the more the inherent variability will manifest for you. And that means potential. That's the idea behind potential. And since you see very high variability and diversity, high dimensional diversity, then competition and war are going to seem like a delusion, because competition is inherently linked to absolute reference frames. But you're not going to have absolute reference frames, and you're not going to have fixed ideas that will compete, saying that only my point of view is the correct one. Correct one with what domain? Correct one under what conditions? You, based on your experience, imagine a reference frame. And if you reduce your attention, then you believe that that reference frame is universal, right? So general ideal organization is impossible, because there's going to be local uniqueness based on inherent variety, diversity in reality. So let's go back to our little picture here and realize that sometimes we need to hire a cleaning lady, and that's wonderful. But we have to understand that if we hire a cleaning lady, then we delegate out things that are very important for us, and that is the organization of our own house. And the organization of our whole own house is always best done by ourselves who live in that house, because we know how to best organize the house for our life, for our functions. And so, because of this, this whole video, which is about religion, attention, and organized mind, is basically summarized. It can be distilled into one essential sentence, and that is that sometimes we need to hire a cleaning lady, but it is best to organize our house ourselves. And with that, I'm gonna thank you for your attention, and goodbye for now.